This week on the Notorious Scoundrels podcast.
Cheap and good. So we like
cheap and good. Yeah.
Both for lunch and for units of Legion.
Welcome to the Notorious Scoundrels, a podcast focused on tactics and competitive play for Star Wars Legion. Hosted by Kyle Dornbos, Michael Barry, and David Zelenka, with Jay Shalansky, the man behind the glass.
Welcome back to Notorious Scoundrels. I'm Kyle. I'm here with Mike and David. How you guys doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. So
I'm burning up. I'm burning up here in California. It's hot. It's 103.
Oh,
air conditioner barely keeping up. Yeah, there's a flame trooper who's sitting outside my window with an infinite supply of fuel called the sun. Me and Mr. Sun, we don't get along. We'll just say that much. All right, but yeah, we're burning up out here. It's horrible.
It's pretty nice here. It's partly cloudy, 70s.
It's
just
gross
saying.
here, Kyle. I'm
so jealous.
So it's been raining here for like the past eternity.
That's true. It's been raining for like 48 hours. You're right. My daughter loves to splash in puddles. It's obnoxious. It's impossible to get her inside in the rain. The small joys. Remember when you were entertained just by splashing in puddles?
Now we need a game like Star Wars Legion to keep us occupied.
I know, right? Speaking of Legion, we're going to talk about a couple things today. We said last week we were going to talk about list building, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. We are going to talk about the X-34 land speeder, and we're also going to talk about basically knowing when the status quo favors you and when it doesn't, and also more specifically playing as rebels, because there have been a lot of rando advice bits thrown around out there about playing as rebels that I think are often oversimplified into bad advice. So, and we're also going to plug Northeast Open again. So that is on July 6th and 7th. It's in Syracuse, the Salt City. Go sign up. Yeah.
Be a good time.
It should be.
You know it'll be the Salt City because I'll be there. Along with the rest of the Scoundrels.
It doesn't need any more salt, let me tell you.
Hey, I'm excited. I'm excited about those salt potatoes you keep talking about.
I mean, the salt potatoes are great, but there's so much salt there, generally speaking, it rotted out the underside of my car.
Whoa.
Do you actually...
What's up?
Do you need to like even salt the roads in winter?
I mean, they salt the roads profusely in winter. And there was so much salt that just like kicks up into your, I don't know what they call. I'm sure there's like a professional automotive word.
Undercarriage.
But yeah, undercarriage or whatever. And it just straight up rotted out in my old car. It was great. I brought it into the mechanic and he was like, yeah, this is going to be $5,000 to replace. And I was like, I bought this thing for $3,500. So how about no?
Brutal.
Yeah, it was a joke.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of salt. We don't need it anymore.
All right.
You're gonna be waiting for me at the airport to make me turn around and get back on the plane.
Mr. Zelenka, I'm sorry. We've reached our salt capacity.
Right, we're at quota. I'm gonna have to ask you to get back on the plane and head back to California.
All right. So, any other housekeeping? I think that's it.
If you're in speaking of California, if you're in the Bay Area or its environs, like within 100 to 200 miles, come to Fairfield, California, where I'm going to be part of the Rally Point qualifier going on there on June 15th. It's Father's Day weekend, so come on out and spend some time with us in Fairfield playing Legion. Get your Worlds invite. Come on out and play.
How far is that from you?
I live in Fairfield, okay. So I'm right there. It's about 10 minutes from me.
So you're telling everybody else, you're like, yo, drive 200 miles, man. It'll be
well. I've done my fair share of traveling for tournaments. Yeah, okay, so I think it's about time that people came to me for once.
Are you competing in this RPQ?
I am. I am. I suckered my friend into running it, so I get to
Awesome.
compete now.
Well,
Huzzah!
hopefully we'll be talking
So
about it on
come out
next
and
week.
play. I hope so too. It should be a good one. All the people that ran KuplaCon with me are going to go ahead and take part in creating this event as
Cool.
well. So it will hopefully be approaching the quality of KuplaCon.
Oh. That's this Saturday. Man, I look at all these dates and stuff, and I'm just like, well, this year's flying by.
Yeah, no kidding. People
Yeah, it's already
people
mid-June
today were
almost.
asking, they were like, when is Worlds? I'm like, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Next Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a lot of pain to do. All right.
Uh-oh.
What?
Uh-oh.
Let's just say that I won't be painting
Yeah.
faces.
Yeah.
Okay.
That could mean a variety of things, just so we're
I'm aware of that. It's intentionally ambiguous.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about list building.
Sweet.
All
Let's
right.
do
All
it.
right. So we talked a while. We had like an entire episode on this way back in episode 16. So
And we're on what, 36 now?
yeah. So literally 20
36.
episodes ago. So I think most of the core advice in that episode still applies. We talked very generally about like deciding what you want your focus of your list to be, and then like supporting that focus. Building out the rest of your list. We talked about upgrades, which upgrades to take, how to think about taking upgrades, and also, like your activation count. So we went through all that in that episode. I think it's still very much applicable today. So go back and listen to that if you want like a full list building primer. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about innovating with list building. So one thing, and I think that we stressed this also in our episode 16, but the most important thing with a list is that you're comfortable with it. You should not just copy a list that you see on the internet. I know that I put out a lot of those, like here are the top lists from a given event articles. I'm not saying don't play those, but if you do, don't like put it together having never played it before and show up to a tournament expecting to do well. If you want to emulate some of those things, do it weeks in advance of whatever event you're planning for, and put it on the table and see if you like it yourself, because you may not. So, that's one big sort of qualifier for that sort of thing. And we want to talk about innovating generally, because I feel like there are a lot of unexplored possibilities. It's been what, 2 months now since we've had a release, ish.
Yeah.
So this leads, obviously, when you have a bunch of not releases, it sort of limits what you can talk about. But that doesn't mean that people can't figure out new things. Look at what we've already talked about, Daniel Lupo, and how he brought saboteurs to the last chance qualifier at Adepticon, and earned an invite to High Command with him, and then at High Command earned an invite to Worlds with him. So, and he surprised a lot of people with how good he was with them. I think Sabs were a unit that had previously been kind of written off by a lot of people. So, he was not surprised by how good they were because he'd been playing them a lot, but he certainly surprised a lot of other people. So I think that there are probably still some unexplored things like that floating around. And you shouldn't be afraid to try them. Do you guys have anything in particular on that topic?
I think there's just a lot of space in Legion right now to do stuff like that. There's a lot of vehicles that maybe don't get used as much as they should. Generally speaking, we talk about things like metas where, generally when we're talking about the game, we've kind of got this predefined space that we're working within, right? But there's definitely some opportunity, with comms relay shenanigans. I haven't seen anybody put like an HQ uplink in a trooper squad yet. Like that's a thing you could do to like mess with some stuff. You know, you could be putting comms relay HQ uplinks in your stormtroopers or snow trooper squads to like get extra new ways to motivate them activations and stuff. So I'm pretty sure that's just face up order tokens. It's not if Darth Vader issues the order.
Yep, that's right.
And there's a lot of stuff like that I don't think people have played around with a ton.
So backtracking from there just a little bit, right? Kyle, you talked about the predefined space, and Mike, you did too. So we have like this predefined space, right, which we call the meta. So there's like some fundamental assumptions, right, about list building, which is sort of like, well, 3 snipers is it, or whatever, or Luke is it, or whatever. And what we're, I guess, looking for when we innovate is we're just sort of looking through all the cards in the game, and maybe just juxtaposing some cards together. For example, like you mentioned, HQ uplink and comms techs with snowtroopers, right? And you're sort of looking through these cards, trying to say to yourself, well, what are some things I could do with these cards that might help me break out of the mold of whatever the meta is. And if I look at the meta, what do I notice about the meta that it's not equipped to deal with or prepared to deal with if I took some list to an event? I think you mentioned vehicles, right? A lot of people don't really expect vehicles to exist, frankly, in a tournament. And lo and behold, what happens when you show up with a vehicle heavy list and they're just not ready for you? You're gonna get a win that's easier than you might have expected out of that game, right? And so I think that's partially what we're doing with innovation, is we're saying, what are some card combinations, what are some game situations, what are some tactics that arise from these cards that haven't been looked at yet or have not been commonly seen? And what if we just went out on a limb, and instead of taking the shortcut, which is the meta, so to speak, we took a look at these less traveled roads and figured out what to do with them.
And medics are, we talked previously about medics. They're sort of another example of this. How long were medics out before Adepticon? And only one of the ultimate Worlds qualifiers had any in their list, and that was Lupo himself.
That was also Lupo.
So
and even after Adepticon for a while, like people still weren't playing them.
Right, and then suddenly people started throwing him in Invader League for sniper strike teams and for Death Troopers. And suddenly everybody's like, oh, you probably should have at least one medic in your list. And I think that's also true for Rebels. I've been running one medic in all my Rebel lists, if not two, basically since Adepticon, and I don't think I can go back. So that's an example of something that was an option, since January. And now it's something that's clearly competitive, but nobody thought to explore it, or at least nobody made a splash with it until late March. So,
So it took one skillful player with enough enterprise and enough drive to take these previously, low status, I guess, upgrades, and go into the lab, for lack of a better term, go into the laboratory, play the combination that he saw, and play it until he got extremely good with it and could beat other people near or above his skill level. And then he went and got a couple of big results with it, and it caused a fundamental shift in the way the game is now played.
Yeah. So kind of taking a little bit from Magic here, a lot of so if for like professional Magic, when you're like testing new decks and like new things that are innovative, um, they generally create something that they call the gauntlet. And the gauntlet is essentially all of the air quote meta decks that you would need to be able to deal with. Um, and I think that that's a good litmus test for, whenever you bring something in that's new or innovative, you need to also make sure that it can hit the litmus tests of being able to deal with the current meta. Otherwise, it's not going to pan out very well for you. But
Right. Like if you're trying to innovate, one of the first things you should probably test that idea against is core span with 3 snipers.
right, yeah. If you can't deal with that, then chances are whatever you're innovating is not working. And it's possible that you just didn't figure it out yet, right? Like you took ATRT flamers, but didn't think to put HQ uplinks on them or something like that, and small adjustments like that can really make or break a list and whether or not it works in certain situations.
Yep.
Built into that also is the willingness to lose repeatedly, because that's kind of what it takes ultimately to figure out if an idea is worthwhile or not.
I think that that's actually a really interesting thing about this game. And I actually, Screwtape was talking about it a little bit on the Discord a while ago, in that like innovating like one thing takes like 20 hours to really do even like marginally right? Like you really need to be able to get like 8 to 10 good games in with a certain, trying to do like a certain thing to figure out if it's potentially good or not. And that's a lot of time to invest in something that you're not sure could work.
Right. Yeah, it's easy for us to say to do this, but most people can't play 3 games a week.
Right. And like even if you're playing 3 games a week, like you're still looking at, you're gonna have to do that a couple weeks in a row before you're not even sure if this is gonna be a thing that works out for you or not.
Yeah, I only manage 1 game
yeah,
a week, honestly.
I mean, I think that most people are in that boat.
Right.
I would imagine your average Legion player probably averages maybe like once every 2 weeks or something like that.
That's likely, yes.
But it's just there's a big time sink into it, and I think that that's why people also gravitate towards the meta lists, because it's easy and it's accepted, and you don't have to spend 30 hours figuring out if it works or not.
Right. It's a template that someone else has already demonstrated is successful. So it doesn't.
I can think of something Yoda said here. If you take the quick and easy path, you'll become an agent of evil. That's very much applicable to the situation that we find ourselves in.
It's good to be a Sith Lord,
I suppose, man. Darth Vader's still good. You heard it here first.
Yeah, what's the master? Is the dark side stronger? Stronger? No, easier. Yes. But not stronger.
Easier, more seductive. Yes. Super applicable.
Speaking of vehicles, so I actually briefly want to hit the tank real quick before we get the X-34, because you just piqued something in my brain as like unexplored. This was again popping around the Discord today, which, by the way, if you're not in the Discord, it's a great place to talk about Legion. And in my experience, it's I think it's actually the most positive forum for it, more so than Facebook and the FFG forums. So yeah, if you're not in there, come in there. We're hanging out and talking about Legion. So anyway, tank discussion was popping around the Discord today. And I think I actually agree with some comments the infamous Hofburger made, the burger, which is basically that the budget tank, like the bare bones one with just the aim pilot, is a little bit unexplored. Run it with Astromex. Those things are only 9 points for Empire. And just shove it in your opponent's face. See what happens.
So it's just the tank and RBAB.
Just the tank and RBAB. Yeah, I think it's 160.
For 160. That's pretty good, actually. Now that
So I will say
it.
that somebody, this was actually in our Huzzah RBQ a couple weeks ago. Somebody used that against me, and I did find that it was definitely easier to kill because it was easier to get flanking shots, and I also was able to get Luke up in there because that thing has to get basically within range 2 for its full dice pool.
Yeah.
So it's definitely easier to kill, but it's also much lower points investment than most other vehicles that are that tough. So yeah, give that a shot. But I know we have a lot more to say about the X34, but I wanted to briefly that was bouncing around today. So
ideas for next week. Plant the
Yep.
seeds here. That's good.
Plant the seeds. All right. So let's talk about the X34.
Yeah, let's talk about this thing.
This is kind of your baby. You wanna take it away?
Man, it's bad because I've been neglecting it. I haven't played it since Cricket.
Cricket.
Yeah, I actually haven't played. I haven't put it on the table since that.
Permanently scarred by that experience.
I think so. So that's a great way to discuss why you should play this thing, right? Anyway, yeah. So I wrote like a ton of articles on Yavin Base about the X34 and how to play it essentially. Where to start? So I guess we should start with the T47.
Whoa!
It's the other heavy. It's pretty overcost. The X34 is not that way. The upgrades are a little bit overcost, but the chassis is correct. It's 75, and once you stack a bunch of upgrades on it, it can do pretty good damage for about 150-ish points. I think there's two builds where you get the best combination of damage and points and value for points. I think those builds there's the budget build, which is just the blaster and the gunner for 138, and the cover pilot, of course. You should always take the cover pilot unless you have a very, very specific reason to take Rider, which is the slow pilot. I call him the slow pilot because no one ever really uses it. No one ever really uses it to bump it up to 3, although you could. But you take the cover pilot, you take the Mark II. That's kind of like the fundamental thing. The Rhodian sometimes is redundant, but if you're not taking the rocket crew, you should probably take the Rhodian crew because that gives you a little bit of extra punch at range 3. Yeah, so 155 for the heavy for the rocket and the Mark II. Pretty good, man. It's like 5 average hits. It's dope. That's actually does hurt.
Range 3 version. Right?
Yeah, that's the range 3 version plus the rocket launcher plus the A300.
What's that come to, like in points?
That's actually 164.
Okay. Not terrible.
Sorry. With the cover pilot, so not terrible. But we're talking like entering Luke territory.
Yeah.
For cost. So I guess that's a great thing. Why would I take this over Luke, right? Well, the two big things. One, it's really cheap to heal because astromechs are only 8 points for the rebels, and that's really, really good. Plus, it projects force at range 3, unlike Luke, which projects force at melee essentially. Because Luke's best weapon is his lightsaber.
His force projection is really like range 2, right? I mean,
yeah, because of charge.
Yeah, that's true. Because of charge and force push, yeah. You can drag things in with you with force push. The other reason is that it has really good static defense. I think for a heavy, it's got cover 2 and has some armor. It's not like the armor with no cap, but it's still pretty good. And why would you take it now? I think the best thing is that Death Troopers don't really have access to crits. They don't surge crit, and they produce a lot of hits really easily. They don't produce crits that easily. And if you only have to make one save, if they only produce the crit from the DLT, then you heal it with your astromech, and you're like, fantastic. That was a Death Trooper shot that didn't hit my Rebel Troopers.
I mean, it's essentially got cover 4. against things that have low impact.
Yeah, exactly, and it's very defensible.
Yeah,
I
was just gonna say the Death Troopers are a great example because they have only 7 dice. It's very high quality dice with rerolls, but it's still just 7 dice, which is going to generate less crits than something like a Z6. So if you're straight crit fishing, it's going to be good against things with low count dice pools, even if those dice pools are high quality.
Yeah, it also saves better than an ATRT. It has defense.
I mean,
surge.
that's not a high bar.
It's not. Yeah.
I mean, that's
right.
not a high bar, but for rebel heavies, like that's at least in line with the other stuff.
Yeah, it's literally
Yeah,
it's literally twice
that's
as likely to save as the ATRT.
Yeah, so there's that.
150 points better.
It can transport heroes. I've used this to some success, and I've heard some other people using it with success. With Han mainly. Han, I think of all the heroes, needs the most positional help because of his lack of a charge keyword. Relentless or
So
steady.
I got thinking about this today.
Sure.
Chewbacca?
Yes.
He certainly cares the least about like the auto wounds that potentially get pushed through while he's riding it.
So there's that, and like he's actually like pretty decent at melee.
They also updated the rules about transported units, and now Chewie can Guardian while he's inside the land speeder, because they added a line of sight bullet, because it just says use the vehicle for line of sight.
Now, does that effectively increase your Guardian range to by the width of the base of the land speeder?
Correct, it does.
That's interesting.
Because when you measure range, you use the base of the land speeder, so it does increase your aura, but it only works for Chewie. It doesn't work for Esteemed Leader. Esteemed Leader, you can't declare a defender.
Sure.
Right, because Esteemed,
you don't get to use
because the rider is not the defender. Yeah.
Correct. So you cannot declare Leia as the defender.
But
the land speeder.
Well, but in theory, so it's also the reverse, right? Because Chewie is the one taking the wounds via Guardian. In that instance, the Esteemed Leader parallel would be like if Leia was standing next to the speeder, there was a single Rebel Trooper unit leader inside the speeder, and you Esteemed Leader to him for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. That's not possible.
No,
I think you can totally do that.
Oh no, actually no, you can do that. Oh, never mind. Yeah, okay. No, that's correct. If there was a single trooper unit leader inside,
I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could.
I mean, it's worth noting that if you have a unit trooper leader that you really can't like get out of LOS, giving him cover 4 as a defense is not horrible in order to preserve an activation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as we talked about last week, preserving single unit leaders is super important for a variety of reasons.
I think that's super narrow, but
yeah, for sure.
Could come up.
Yeah, if you're putting anything in it, it's going to be characters for the most part.
What else? So transport is good for heroes that don't have keywords like charge or steady. I wouldn't recommend putting Sabine or Jin in it because they don't play nice with transport. The other thing is that you can't embark while you have a box. So that is just a non-starter. It's specifically outlawed in the rules that you can't board a transport while carrying a crate to recover the supplies.
That's a bummer because that feels super thematic.
Yeah, like if Jin infiltrated somewhere and then you could hop into the transport with the box in tow, that would be just really cool and thematic. But I think it's just too ridiculous. Well, it's too fast.
Yeah, I mean that also means you'd be able to grab a box and hop in the tank.
Yeah, exactly.
Also true.
And then never lose it. Yeah. Then they have to blow up the tank to even get to the box.
Yeah. So you don't even have to go anywhere really. You just sit there.
Right.
It's probably a good balance choice. Just, would have been fun.
Yeah. Much in the same way that Luke, not being able to charge off a disembark unless he's got an action in the tank, or an action stored up.
So how do you So
a
how are
good
you running
decision.
this thing like in practice? Both what list are you running it as a part of, and then what do you do with it once it's on the table?
I run it currently. The way that I run it is as part of like a Leia spam list. So I run Leia 6Zs, one officer, two astromechs, three snipers, and the land speeder is like my heavy fighting vehicle type thing. Um, it's basically running the land speeder in place of Luke in exchange for some more courage, 2 units, some more inspire, and the ability to repair the thing and to have armor in my list. Um, that was pretty effective. It fought Nima's land speeder list at the RPQ in Sacramento. That was pretty sweet, actually. He ran Luke Leia 6Zs, or not 6Zs, but he ran Luke Leia fleets 5Zs and a land speeder, no snipers. And it was really effective to have both the land speeder and Luke on the table as threats, not transporting Luke, just having them as separate threats, especially in the Rebel mirror, because oh my gosh, does this thing reap souls when it attacks other Rebel players. Um, it hits harder than double bikes, and we knew, or hits harder than like two speeder bikes together, and we knew that speeder bikes attacking Rebels out of cover was bad news, because it was averaging 4 hits. Yeah, this thing averages 5, and not uncommon to just wipe a Rebel squad off the table out of cover with the land speeder shooting. But yeah, so I think going forward though, I think running the Han with the land speeder is probably great because Han has reckless and Han does need the positional help. Having it on the table as a secondary threat alongside Luke is excellent as well. And of course, unless the sniper gets a crit, this thing doesn't really care about snipers. It just doesn't care. It has no weak point really. It has like cover 2, armor 2. So unless the sniper gets a natural crit, snipers can't hurt it.
Yeah, it's certainly less vulnerable to snipers than the tank is, for sure.
Much less. So I mean, to answer your question, you either run it as like a kind of primary armor threat damage dealer, or you run it as a secondary threat with resistant keywords that your opponent can't really handle. And very high
you're
average
trying to
damage.
flank with this thing, basically.
Absolutely trying to flank with it. You're also trying to break through with it because it's fast when it wants to be.
So are you typically, obviously you have to take the compulsory move, but then are you ever moving after that, or is it aim shoot as much as possible?
Aim shoot as much as possible because your compulsory move will get you there anyway. The only time I think I ever willfully move with it is if I'm turning around, or if there's 3 cases. I'm either turning around to attack something that I drove past, I'm pivoting to get the hard point on target if my compulsory move couldn't get me there, or I am deliberately double moving to break through or deposit a hero on a flank. But almost all the time, it's compulsory move, aim, shoot. It does also work a trigger on vehicles. There's builds that really do well against vehicles. You take the M45 and the uplink, I think, to do the recover thing. It's kind of like they took Bistan and turned him into a vehicle.
Well, I mean, it's
because the M45 is literally
it's the same dice pool as Bistan, right?
Yeah.
Same keywords too.
Same keywords too. It's Bistan, but it's 6 more points.
Yeah.
With no extra wound.
Well, it's on a much hardier platform.
That's fair enough, yeah. Much hardier. So that actually does really work against vehicles, especially with the A300 as well, because you're rolling like, with the rocket launcher, you're rolling like 2 black, a red, and 7 white into a vehicle at range 3. You're gonna get crits. Like,
yeah,
that's 10 dice.
I like the Bistan build just because I think being able to keep the land speeder out at range 4 is pretty huge.
I agree as well. I think that's another way that it's very effectively used, especially with the cover pilot, just because it's got cover 2, and so DLTs are doing nothing to it.
Yep.
The only thing that can pen it at range 4 is natural crits or the ATST, really.
Yeah, or something like maximum firepower.
Yeah, exactly. So let's see, what else do we have here? Oh yeah, there's the overhang question. so repulsor vehicles are in this interesting place. They used to be not allowed to overhang things. You had to have the base completely on something. You couldn't hang any part of the base off a surface. Now, though, they changed it. I think the rules says when a unit performs a compulsory move, this is quoting from the latest rules reference, the bases of the minis in the unit, I guess they're accounting for speeder bikes, can partially overhang ledges as long as each mini is stable and not precariously placed. So that essentially means as long as it balances on a surface and is not gonna like fall off, obviously, you can totally put it there and it's legal. Of course, the fallout of this now is that things are gonna have trouble entering melee with you if your base is like hanging off the edge of something.
Yeah, so we talked about this. You had a game with Nima, I think, in one of your RPQs where there were the X34 was overhanging, and Luke could, contact it physically with his model, but because the base wasn't on the table, he couldn't actually go base to base.
Right. The situation was essentially that my land speeder was like half of it was on the ground, and then the other side of it was um, stuck on the side of a cliff that it could ignore with speeder one, and the middle section was suspended in air. And where Luke wanted to go, because he needed some range for force push and some other positional considerations, where he wanted to be, his base could not touch my base. And so then the question arose: well, if like Luke is like the model's like practically inside the base of this land speeder, so one could Luke's base go underneath my base, and therefore he would be quote unquote in base contact with it. And I think the answer was the rules as written don't support that. I think physical contact is the bar.
Unfortunately, I am inclined to agree.
Yeah, and we actually, so I don't know how you guys ruled it there, but this came up, and a lot of people were asking about it also in my game with Kingsley, because I had Bosk on a small box essentially, and there wasn't enough room physically to put another model next to him. But we discussed, he was playing Sabine, and we discussed actually even before he moved Sabine, he's, can Sabine melee him in this situation? And I was basically like, I think it's kind of stupid that she can't. So, we'll agree that she should be able to. So, I think rules as written, like you have to actually be base to base. But personally, I think if you can stick your head up someone's ass, you should be able to melee them. So,
yeah, we ruled it the same way because I honestly like I knew that I could say no to Nima and that the rules as written would support me, but I knew that I did not want to gain the upper hand on him via that method because just looking at it, it made no sense.
Yeah, it's like Luke is like hip thrusting your X34, and yet he can't hit it with his lightsaber.
Yeah, he was like if I would try to compare it in real life terms, I think he was less than 2 feet from the nose of this thing. Like obviously he could hit it in melee. Come on.
Yep. But yeah, rules as written. Technically it's got to be base to base. So we'll see if the overhang rule leads to any eventual changes on that. But at least at the moment.
Yeah. So your mileage may vary. Just if you're going to use melee characters, just look out for that because that's something your opponent could do. I think is ultimately the lesson until we get some dev clarification on it. And as an X34 player, that's something you can do too. And I've seen similar abuse with the tank. If you can balance the tank where half of its base is hanging off a ledge, guess what?
You're screwed, you gotta go around the back or something.
Yep, exactly. And then, of course, you're in melee with a vehicle, so you're not engaged, and everybody else can shoot you. So it's even worse.
So you got anything else on the X34?
Oh man, well, there's plenty to read in the guides that I have at yavinbase.blog. It's a series called Ground Sliding, so I think I go into pretty good depth about how to use the darn thing, apart from what we've talked about here. we kind of covered some of the more like hard to put into writing kind of things. But I think for just general knowledge and information, I think you should check out those 3 ground sliding articles. The latest one is currently on Reddit, so you can look at it there. And yeah, /r/SW Legion for the Legion Reddit.
Awesome. So let's move on to fighting like a rebel. And this isn't necessarily going to be specific to rebels, but at least the first part of it I want to just talk about briefly, because I feel like there's like this shorthand advice being thrown out, and this has been since the beginning of the game, really, about like how rebels need to quote unquote focus on objectives or focus on the mission.
Got to complete the mission, Kyle.
Right, and and like this. So I think it's first of all, it's funny because this always seems to come from Empire players, this advice, and it's like, you know, no, who are you to like tell rebels how to play? But but also I think it's well-meaning, but also like usually gets sort of taken out of context and oversimplified to imply that rebels can't kill things, which I think is just not true. Rebels are very good at killing things, but also, you know, most of the missions, with the possible exception of recover supplies, require you to kill things. Pretty much everything, even recover, you're gonna have a hard time winning if you're not killing anything. But generally speaking, like almost every mission involves counting unit leaders, and you have 6 turns usually to reach a point where you need to count those unit leaders. Even intercept the transmissions, which has scoring on turns 2 and 4. If you have more unit leaders at the end of the game than your opponent at turn 6, and you can score that middle objective, then you can concede the first 2 scoring turns and usually still win. So, which I do all the time, because we talked about this already last week, but yeah. So, you know, it's like the shorthand of focusing on objectives, I think, you know, like you need to kill things to actually win objectives for the most part. Recover the supplies is really the only objective where you can like credibly steal a win and have almost all your stuff die still. You know, moisture evaporators in a competitive game usually comes down to, we use the shorthand at MOV a lot, but basically points killed, because for the most part each player has 2 quote unquote safe vaps. And you know, it often ties on victory points, which means it goes straight to points killed. And then, as mentioned, the other ones all involve counting unit leaders at the end of the game. So you got to kill things. But luckily, rebels are pretty good at killing things, at least in my opinion.
That's what they do. They're terrorists. That's their bread and butter.
Yeah. You know, like they
get your AK-47s out. Come on.
So I would say if rebels have a design philosophy, it's that they're fragile, but they also have extremely efficient attacks. Now, many of those attacks are short-ranged, right? Fleet troopers are a good example. Fleet troopers are the most efficient unit in the game besides an ATRT flamethrower for killing troopers.
Right, I was just about to mention fleets. I think they're like you said, they're like the most offensively efficient unit in the whole game.
They are range 2, which is limiting, obviously. But if you're
limited vis.
Limited vis is good. If you're playing with enough line of sight blockers, like we've previously stressed is necessary, you know, move them up, get them in position behind those line of sight blockers. I personally love to use them with Luke because you can use force push to pull things around corners for them, into standby, or, you know, even do it before they stand by and just take a turn later to shoot them if it's a unit that's activated already. You know, shorten that range too by bringing the enemy to you instead of the other way around. So you can use things like reckless diversion. You know, Han is great with fleets because you can force your opponent to shoot at something other than the fleets, something much less valuable. So
strict orders is good with fleets too, because a lot of times they'll try to suppress you from out of your range to stop you. And guess what? If you have a face up and strict, you don't care. You know.
So yeah, just as a general concept, you know, when you hear the phrase "focus on objectives," I mean, like that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still try and kill stuff.
Yeah, whoever says that, I just imagine they have this like diabolical look on their face, and then in parenthesis it says, "So I can
Yeah,
kill
right.
you."
That's almost like dark
You
side
know?
advice, right? Like you're not powerful
Yeah,
enough to confront me. You should just hide and hope to win by objectives.
right.
That's yeah, it doesn't work.
Yeah, nonsense.
I mean sometimes it works, but it definitely is not like
Yeah,
a good plan to go into a game with. And probably not very fun either.
no,
So yeah. But let's talk about, so this kind of segues into the concept of like recognizing when the status quo favors you and when it doesn't, and the concept of beatdown versus control, which I think is a Magic term, which actually I don't play. But I know you do, Mike. So do you want to talk about those two terms real quick?
Yeah, so generally speaking, when you're playing the beatdown, you have determined that you need to be like aggressively attacking. You're in the position to drive the game, right? And you really need to kind of like, I don't know, in game terms, like it's, you have to move up and make a play on the objective, right? Or move up and make a play on killing your opponent's units. It's generally more likely unless you're playing recover the supplies. In a control state, you're kind of just like looking to preserve the status quo. I've got 3 boxes on recover the supplies. They're all behind a line of sight blocker. I'm looking to, not get murdered. I've got my moisture vap sabotaged, and I'm blue player, so I'm gonna hide all my dudes and wait for you to come to me. Those are example of like control situations. And on the opposite side of the fence, if you're red player and on vaps and you can't see the opponent, you have to make an aggressive play. You've got to be the beatdown. And knowing, and those are clearly like very clear like pictures of when you are those things. It's not, in a game of breakthrough, it's not really clear who the beatdown, who the control player is. But what generally is evident is that you both can't be the beatdown player. Somebody should be in the driver's seat for kind of being aggressive and progressing the game along. That's not to say that you should cease to be aggressive, because killing your opponent's units is like always a good thing generally. But overall, that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about beatdown versus control.
Yeah, what's the quote? If you're both jousting, one of you is wrong, which means that if you're both being aggressive, one of you's doing it wrong.
Yeah. And I think that like there are certain game modes where that might not hold completely true. Like for instance, in breakthrough, sometimes you like really you need to like move forward and shoot, right? Yep. But I will say, right. A really good example of this was at the LCQ. My last game of the day was a breakthrough, like Empire Mirror, and I did nothing but double move my units that game pretty much. And I had 8 units in the end zone at the end, and a lot of them were like single trooper leaders. But he had spent so much time shooting at my dudes, that he couldn't contest. He couldn't get things into the breakthrough zone. And in that situation, it kind of turned out that like he was acting as the control player when realistically he maybe should have been the beatdown. So.
Right, and control player doesn't always necessarily mean
Right.
defensive either, right? Like in that situation, I would argue you were the control player even though you were moving up, because you recognized, that if you didn't kill enough of your units, you were gonna have.
Yeah, and I mean, like the analogy is not like as sound in Legion terms as it is in Magic terms, in the sense that like,
right,
like a beatdown. Generally, when you're on the beatdown, like you've got a mono red deck and you're slinging lightning bolts at your opponent's face. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly true.
Well, and Legion is an interesting example for this, because you can also sort of tailor your lists to be better at one of these two things, right? Like I would say that a saboteur list is a control list, for the most part. because you're much better defensively. You're much better if you're already holding the cards and your opponent has to take them from you, right? Whereas something like, my sorry about the barbecue list with 3 flamethrower ATRTs, that's a beatdown list, because it's very good at getting in your opponent's face, and not very good at staying in cover and making your enemy come to you. So
yeah, that list can't really play defensively because it's got a limited. Those RTs have a limited lifespan because of the DLT, right? So
yeah,
no, but that's
right,
that's the point though. Like you're trying to run 18 armor wounds in your opponent's face and be like, can you kill this? No,
right.
I win.
Yep.
Essentially, that's a very simplified version of what's happening, but
Yeah, I mean, you're forcing the beatdown game state regardless of the
Right.
objectives and regardless of the battlefield conditions, right? Like
Yeah.
your goal from the thing about that though is that a list like that can't flex, right?
Yep.
Yes, it has one plan, and if that
Yeah,
plan fails, I don't know what to do.
and I mean, not to go back to the idea of a meta, but the lists that are like on meta are like very good at flexing between beatdown and control, right?
Yep.
You've got pieces in them like Luke and Boba or Bosk or whatever, and those things are like very good at, oh, I need to be the beatdown. Okay, I'm the tip of the spear. I'm going in with my lightsaber and I'm going to chop stuff up, right? And like the snipers and the core units tend to, make up the kind of control element of those lists where like you're keeping your opponent in line and things are going to go the way I planned them to. And to another extent, like Leia and Veers are like a large part of that
Yep.
equation.
Yeah, both of those are actually excellent examples of control commanders, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's why those lists do so well, I think. And at least my play style is I prefer to be the control player. So, the lists that I talk about, like my Invader League list, that's why it's a support commander and a control commander and Veers, a flex play like Bosk, and then 6 core and 3 snipers, all of which can flex. So,
yeah.
All right. You guys got anything else on that one?
I mean, I think just to kind of go back to the main sticking point here is you need to be able to identify like what role you need to play in a game and when it is.
Yep.
Right. So there's not really a hard and fast like if X then Y. Generally speaking, if you're down on unit leaders, you should be playing more aggressively because you're probably losing.
Yeah, and you got to know what the end objective is and how you're going to meet it, when turn 6 comes around. But yeah, like developing this skill, like sort of the vision to be able to tell which one you are and when, it takes a long time. We've already so not my most recent game with Kingsley, but my high command game with Kingsley. He was the control player and I was the beatdown player, and I thought I was acting like a control player. And I needed to be, it was key positions. His cover was closer to the key position than mine, so all he had to do was basically wait, and then at the end of the game, rush the middle objective. And it was on me to push him off of it before that happened, and I needed to be doing that from turn 1, and I wasn't. So, like that's a skill that takes a long time to develop, and it's not one that really anyone I don't think has mastered either. But you just it helps to develop that vision to be able to tell when you need to be aggressive and when the status quo favors you and you just need to force your opponent into coming to you.
Yeah, I think it is good to note that there are 2 points of the game that you really need to consider your role, and that is like once condition cards, like your deployment condition
and setup cards,
and your setup cards have been chosen. It's at that point you need to be like, okay, what am I? Because if you're the beatdown, you should be deploying very aggressively, and you should be deploying so that you can get places that you need to go. The second kind of stage of the game where you need to consider that is when whoever determined they were the beatdown player accomplished the goal that made them feel like they needed to be the beatdown. So in the example that you gave, had you identified that you were the beatdown player from turn 1 and taken that point from Kingsley, clearly at that point there's an inflection, right? And all of a sudden Kingsley needs to be the beatdown and he needs to take it from you.
Right. Yep. And again, Moisture Wraps presents a very simple analogy here, right? Like if you're blue player, you start out as control, but if red player kills something before you do, suddenly the script flips, right?
Yep.
So
that's probably the best example overall is to like, how to simply kind of look at it in game terms.
Yep.
It's not as clear on something like Breakthrough or Recover the Supplies.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely the cleanest example because you literally you go from winning to not winning.
Yeah.
And if you're not winning, you need to be the beatdown.
Yep.
All right. You guys got anything else to talk about? I mean, we have we have a couple things that we've tabled for next week.
You know what? I have something I want to talk about.
Okay.
I want to talk about contrast paints.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So
because holy hell, they look dope. And I'd like to say they're sold out pretty much.
They are.
And I'm a little bit miffed.
So this is actually a good segue because we've decided that we want to start doing a hobby segment. Because I love hobbying. I've talked in the past about how much I love airbrushing because it's like dark magic. And I think contrast paints have, I mean, like just looking at the pictures that have been floating around the internet, it's like some kind of sorcery, I mean, basically GW claims that you can spray on an undercoat and then just kind of slop this contrast paint on there, and it does this kind of magic thing where you get like contours and shading and stuff all at once.
Yeah,
it kind of looks like that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, it looks really good. Somebody posted like an example of somebody did like 40 of the same base, and it had like stuff on it so you could like see the contour, and it worked pretty well. I mean, I gotta say, for people that like to play Space Marines or Stormtroopers, it translates pretty well.
Yeah, they do have some whitish colors, some off whites and stuff that'll work for Stormtroopers. So, if you got to paint 30 Stormtroopers, which I'd recommend, because I like lots of Stormtroopers.
Or maybe some clone troopers or battle droids.
Yeah, battle droids. I mean, when you're gonna have to paint like, what's 8 times 6? 48 battle droids.
48. Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
tan contrast.
Hey man,
go.
that's just your core options. So.
Yeah.
That doesn't include the whatever else is happening.
Yeah. Oh man. I am actually super looking forward to those because of hard plastic. And I love the posing and stuff.
Yeah, I really just I'm hoping to all hope that we can eventually put like Darth Maul on the table. That's when I start playing that army for real. Sure.
Yeah. We'll see. All right. So yeah, contrast paints. Well, I want to try them out myself, for science. And we can talk about how to use them. And whoa, is somebody being murdered?
Someone is screaming outside my house. I don't know what's going on, but I don't know. Should I go check?
I think maybe they were just that excited about contrast paints.
I honestly think it was just like a little kid screaming in joy. But that's what it sounded like.
That's I do want to talk about airbrushing too, maybe next week, but there's tons of things to hit with that too. But yeah, check out those contrast paints.
She's getting a set of contrast.
There you go.
For her birthday.
There you go.
Right. Ta-da!
All right. There's one more thing I wanna briefly plug. Since you were plugging your X34 articles there, David. Is my so I know I have been slacking on the unit guides recently, but up still on Never Tell Me the Odds is basically I call it the damage calculator, but it's essentially like an attack pool simulator tool. You can put in like all the dice and stuff from an attack, other variables, cover, dodge, pierce, pretty much anything you can think of. And it'll spit out like a report that gives you all kinds of things, including average wound numbers and probabilities of various outcomes based on the defender and all that. So yeah, if you I don't have an X34 article up. Obviously, David does, but if you want to know about like those three of them,
Three of them.
But if you want to know about
Yeah,
those
it's a lot.
multicolor rainbow multi-dice dice pools and see how they do against various targets, you can throw them up on there and check it out. So I will say also it's obviously there to be downloaded for anyone. It's available to the public and it's there to be used, which is why it's there. But if you do use it for like an article or something, if you could just link me and cite it, that'd be great. So
Link me, brah.
link me, brah.
I will say that my favorite use of that tool thus far is to fact check. Oh man, I got like schooled by luck,
Yep.
Because there's been a significant number of times where I'm like, man, that sucks. That's never gonna happen again. And then I put it in the calculator. I'm like, maybe it's gonna.
Yeah, that's a good use of it. So there's lots of use of it.
Yeah. Maybe we can talk about expectations and managing tilt a little bit. Maybe that's another good
managing
topic for
tilt. That is a
future.
good one. Well,
since we are competitive focused,
we'll have to put that on the list.
Well, you'd have to
put that in there later.
Watch your like salt intake, right?
Oh yeah, of course you would. I don't know what you're saying, Mike.
I don't know. Maybe you can have some potatoes. Maybe.
Maybe in Syracuse.
All right, so hang on. Seriously, I know we're like wrapping up, but how is a salt potato actually just different than a baked potato with salt on it?
Okay, so a salt potato is literally.
It's bad at playing Rebels.
Yikes! All right, I did not make that joke. I just want to be clear. So you have a baked potato, which is actually like baked in the oven, and then you put like salt on it with like a salt shaker, right? A salt potato is a potato with essentially no salt on it that is cooked in a vat of salt water.
So it's like literally infused with salt.
Yes.
That kind of sounds delicious.
It's great. You cut it open, you just put a little bit of butter on it, and you're done. You don't need all the extra trimmings that like normal baked potatoes do. It's just salt potato, little bit of like molten butter, good to go.
All right, there you go. That's why I'm going to Northeast Open. Salt potato.
It's also like the cheapest
100%.
meal on the face of the planet.
Oh, I bet.
Heck yeah. Cheap and good. So we like
cheap and good. Yeah.
Both for lunch and for units in Legion.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. Looking at you, Fleet Troopers.
I like my
67 points.
All right. I actually prefer the 69-point version with recon intel, but that's just me.
Okay, getting fancy there.
Yep. All right. Should we close this? Should we land this plane here?
Yeah.
All right. I'm Kyle.
I'm Mike.
I'm David.
And we are the Notorious Scoundrels. See you next week.
Join us next week for another episode of the Notorious Scoundrels.
This has been a 5th Trooper production.